Hey everyone, it's Jananie and welcome back to my channel, This Story Ain't Over. Today we are going to be talking about the worst books that I read in 2023. This is a combination of books from the books that I read front to back that I didn't think were that good or I had higher expectations for and they really disappointed me. And then the other half of these books are just ones that I DNF'd throughout the year. The books that didn't grip me enough to keep me going, or ones that I wasn't feeling initially and I gave up on, but there's a potential that I may pick them up at a later point. I'm usually pretty positive on my channel and I like to talk about the books that I actually like. So this is the one video of the year where I'm going to tell you all the ones that I didn't really feel. A lot of these you may have seen me talk about in some of my wrap-ups though, and I have expressed where I have DNF'd or I didn't like them. One thing that's been different about 2023 from my previous years of reading was that I just didn't stop myself from DNFing books. If I wasn't enjoying something by like the 30% in, I just gave up on them because life is short and I honestly just wanted to be reading books that I actually enjoyed. And I personally find it to be just utter hell to drag myself through a book that I'm not enjoying. I know some people can do that just to like have commentary on the book afterwards, but I cannot. It is so painful. I have a very short attention span with my ADHD, so I just need to get to something that actually stimulates me. So more often than not, I just need to DNF things. With that said, I have 6 books that I read front to back that I didn't really enjoy or I had really high expectations for and they really let me down. And then I have 7 books that I DNF'd over the course of 2023. So the first 2 books that I really did not enjoy in 2023 were actually from the same vlog where I read a bunch of romance books that were popular on TikTok. These were book talk favorites that I'd seen all over and that I'd heard so many people say great things about. But honestly, both of these just let me down so hard. Like I was just so unimpressed. The first book was The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. If you didn't know, Christina Lauren are a writing duo actually. Their names are Christina and Lauren and they put them together to form one name. And they've got a whole backlist of books that they've written. I've never read one of their books before, but this was my first and I honestly feel like this was the wrong one to start with. Although the concept seemed pretty interesting, which involves the best man and the maid of honor of this like couple who get married. That couple gets food poisoning on their wedding day. And so the best man and the maid of honor take their vacation and go on it. It's all expenses paid, but they have to act like they are a married couple in order to get away with the whole thing. And the two of them hate each other, and so it's like a hate to love, enemies to lovers. So all that seemed pretty interesting, but I honestly just really didn't like the chemistry between the characters. I didn't like the characters individually on their own either. And overall, I was just kind of unimpressed by the entire thing. Another thing I really didn't like was just the way that the romance just seemed outdated. Although the book came out in 2019, I believe, I felt like it was a romance from like the 2010s, like the early 2010s, because that's the vibe I got from the characters. There's an element of the main love interest like gaslighting the main character. I feel like in this day and age, like that's just not something we are putting up with in romance novels. So it just felt kind of dumb. Honestly, I don't remember much else from that, but I do distinctly remember that there was an element of them describing him as like growling at her in like romantic scenes and like sex scenes. And I was just like, no. This is not it. So overall, I really didn't like that one and it was basically a 2 stars for me. And then the other book from that romance vlog was Funny You Should Ask by Alyssa Sussman. This book, I swear, Book Talk did me dirty with. I had been hearing so many great things about this book and that it was like such a great celebrity romance and that it was a really great second chance romance, and I just had like sky high expectations, I think. And when I read it, it was just nowhere near what I thought it would be. Essentially, from what I remember, it does involve that second chance element. So we're opening up many years later when the characters are engaging in an interview. The main character is like a reporter and the main love interest is a actor. He's like a really big deal and she's trying to sort of save his image currently. And the reason she was called to do this interview many years later is because she had done a profile on him many years ago and a lot of people like really loved that profile. They had done a whole like weekend of hanging out together and it became like infamous for just being this like really cute and like romantic type of thing, and everyone thought that like there's something going on between them. And so at first glance, it seems like it might be fun, but honestly, I just really didn't see the chemistry between the characters. I found the main character to be really annoying, and same with the love interest. I didn't like either of them on their own. And then I think the other element that plays into this is that I realize for myself, I just really do not like celebrity romances. I personally don't even like the idea of celebrity either. I think the element of falling for someone because of their fame is not it for me. Like just because you see that person on the TV and you have watched all their movies or or whatever it is. That doesn't mean you know them. And I do recall that this book had some not great sex scenes as well, so that also turned me off. So overall, it was just not a fun experience. I really had to push myself through this one to finish it for that vlog. And so overall, I think I gave this one like a 1.52 stars. Really did not enjoy it. The next book I read for a video where I tested out booktubers' favorite books of 2022, and that book is Daisy Darker by Alice Feeney. I have to say this isn't like the worst book that I read in 2022, but it was one of the more disappointing ones, and I do remember finishing it and being really annoyed. I think I gave it like a 2.5 stars, but in hindsight, I think I could roll it up to 3. I'm not like super picky about this one. I did enjoy parts of it, so there was that element. Basically, this is like a closed room mystery. It involves like this extended family who are coming to this island home where the, I think, grandmother is reading out her will and letting them all know what they're getting. But then some murders start happening in the house and everyone's trying to figure out who the murder is. And we're following a main character in the book. And while I was like initially interested and I was like intrigued and I wanted to know what was happening, I think the suspense element was done really well. I do feel like there wasn't as much substance to it as I wanted. I do feel like the ending was a bit of a cop-out in my opinion. Essentially, you believe that the world of this book is one thing, but then it seems to have another element to it. That's the best way I can describe this without spoiling the book. But yeah, I just felt like the twist at the very end was just not it, and I think that's what ruined the book for me. Otherwise, I was really enjoying it up until that point, even though I don't think it was like the highest caliber of writing or that it had that many themes that I was really interested in. So I feel like even beyond that like cop-out ending for me, it wouldn't have been anything higher than a 3 stars. I think that's just a matter of my taste though. I'm not a huge mystery thriller reader, so I don't think it's the fault of this book. Like, I think it did all the mystery thriller elements really well. The next book is one that was like a highly anticipated release for me, and it's by an author that I really love, and I was just so disappointed by this book. It took me months and months to read this. Even by the end, when I finally got around to finishing it, I was just so disappointed. So that book is The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi. Again, I really love Roshani Chokshi. I have read all of her previous books, her Star Touch Queen duology, the Gilded Wolves series. I've read the first Ara Shah book. I have the other ones, and I absolutely loved all of her previous books, but this was her first adult novel, and I was really hyped for it because it was her adult debut. I've been reading more adult books, and I felt like it was just a really exciting moment. And this book had been marketed as a story about a dark marriage and the pitfalls and darkness that can happen in a marriage. But what the book actually ended up being was more of something about the friendship of these two characters in the book, and then the marriage husband element being like very minor to the book. Essentially, it starts with the husband narrating and we get a little bit of like what the marriage is like, but then we flash back into parts of the wife's childhood and the moments with her friend. So the entire book is essentially narrated by the husband and then the friend Azur, and we are sort of getting this mysterious image of the wife Indigo and all of the creepy, magical, and speculative things going on. One thing about this book is that it's sort of framed like a fairy tale and it feels like a dream, and I think for me personally that just didn't work. It felt too dreamlike, it felt too ungrounded. I felt like most of the details were very confusing. There was way too much like flowery language, and I feel like there wasn't really any plot to the book at all. As you guys know, I'm a very plot-driven reader. I really like character-driven books in some contexts, but I feel like this one was just so slow and honestly boring to me. And obviously a lot of the themes in this book were told through the metaphors of some of these speculative elements happening in the book, but I still felt like they weren't that strong to me. And the twist at the end was also something that I kind of expected and wasn't really impressed by either. So I basically rated this like a 2.5 stars. It really didn't do it for me, and I was honestly just so disappointed. But I do know so many people who love this book, so if you were thinking about picking it up, I would still give it a try, because if you are a different type of reader from me, if you're not as plot focused, if you have a much larger attention span, then maybe this book will be for you. The one thing that I do think I enjoyed about this book though was the element of just examining innocence in the two girls in the flashback scenes and sort of the loss of innocence and the loss of magic. I really liked that sort of metaphorical element and it was really beautifully done. But aside from that, this didn't do for me. The next book that I really didn't enjoy from 2023 was Y/N by Esther Yi. This book has some merits to it, but I do think it was one of the more disappointing books of the year, and it was one of the more painful books to read. I go back and forth about how I feel about this one, but I do think that the elements that I liked about it from the beginning of the book and that hooked me in initially got really tiring by the end of the book. Essentially, this follows a woman who becomes like a super fan of this like K-pop idol, and she finds herself traveling to Korea and becoming so obsessed with this K-pop idol that she just drives her life in a totally ridiculous direction. It is like one of those books that is just totally unhinged. The main character was absolutely unhinged, and I think that was like entertaining for like the first half of the book, but by the second half of the book I was just like, this is just going in circles and I don't really care that much anymore about this main character or her obsession or the K-pop idol that she's obsessed with. An element of this book though is partly being a satire of like that fandom mentality, but also showing the heart in it and also just how much it affects so many people's lives, but also sort of the emptiness at the end of all this, at the end of this giant journey and all of these years, time, blood, sweat, and tears put into this devotion that can just sort of vanish when you sort of grow out of it, or if you are confronted with the object of your obsession and realize that they are not exactly what you made them out to be. I think the book did that element really well. The dissonance between the imagined figure in your mind, you know, the one that you have devoted yourself to, and then the actual blood, flesh person in the world who is flawed, who makes mistakes, who cannot live up to that ideal that you've made of them. So yeah, it was an interesting book, but it was just so whack, to be honest, and so unhinged, and I feel like it was just really painful to follow the main character at some points. So although I really appreciated like the message of the book and like the examination of this type of character, I didn't think it was very enjoyable. And then the last book that I didn't really enjoy from 2023 that I was really disappointed by was by another one of my favorite authors, and that is Silver Nitrate by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I read this very recently, and if you've been watching my channel for a while now, you know that I absolutely love Silvia Moreno Garcia books. Some of her books are some of my all-time favorites. I usually am so in love with them, and I find I like them even more as time passes after I've read them. But this book just wasn't it for me. I think part of it just had to do with the fact that I wasn't really interested in the topic of this book. It involves like obscure Mexican horror films, and I honestly just wasn't really into that. It's also set in the 90s, and it had a bit of this like retro-ish feel, but I honestly just wasn't really intrigued by that, and I kind of just felt pretty bored by most of the things that were going on. Although I liked the two main characters, I think they had a complicated relationship. I feel like the main plot of this book, since it was revolving around this Mexican horror films and this slightly occult supernatural element, I just wasn't feeling that, and so I couldn't even appreciate the other element. After about the 30% in, I really had to just push myself through the rest of this book because my interest just kept waning, and it was like watching paint dry reading this book because nothing was happening. Out of Silvia Moreno Garcia's books, I think this one is the most similar to Velvet Was the Night, but I do think I enjoyed that book a lot more because there were some interesting things happening with the characters. So if you are going to read Silvia Moreno Garcia books, please do not start with this one because the rest of her books are way better in my opinion, and I absolutely love them, and they just have like such heartwarming characters who are just trying their best, and I appreciate them so much. Okay, now I'm quickly gonna go through all the books that I DNF'd, did not finish, in 2023. I think there's probably a few more that I DNF'd as well, but I don't remember which ones, and so I'm not bothering to talk about them, but these are the ones that I had actually tracked that I had started reading and gave up on. So the first one is The Hacienda by Isabel Cañas. I have read Isabel Cañas' other book, Vampires of El Norte. I read that one first. I enjoyed it. It wasn't my favorite, but it was like a solid read. I didn't really care for the romance in that one, but I did like the supernatural elements to the book, and I liked the take on vampires that she did because it was pretty uncommon. This book though, I feel like I just really could not get into. I didn't really like the characters to begin with. I wasn't really invested in the romance, and even the supernatural bits just didn't hook me the way I was hoping. This book basically involves a woman who gets into a marriage of convenience so that she can own her own home, and that home ends up being like haunted in some way, and she ends up enlisting the help of this priest to sort of exorcise the home, but she's also trying to balance the fact that she doesn't want people to know that she believes that this is a haunted place because her status in society is going to go down. But she's also married to this other man, and there's like this romance element with her and the priest. And honestly, none of it was really gripping me. I didn't really see the chemistry in the characters. I didn't really see why they liked each other aside from being physically attracted to each other. And again, I think I went into this hoping for more of the supernatural element, the haunted house element, and some other themes, but it was just really focused on the romance, and that just wasn't doing it for me. I feel like that's become a pretty common theme for me for a lot of the books that I've been recently reading. I don't really care about the romance, I just want the other elements to really work for me, and they haven't been. Another book that I DNF'd was Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez. This one I honestly don't have much to say. It's a really long book. It involves some supernatural elements and like ghosts. It follows a father and his son as they're sort of on the run, and I've heard really amazing things about this book, but I honestly just couldn't get into it. It was very much on the slow side in terms of pacing, and as we've learned, I have a very short attention span, so I need faster paced books. And honestly, I think this one I may have enjoyed had I had the patience and time to just like sit down with it and read it through the physical book, because the audiobook, while it was nicely narrated, it was just still feeling really slow even with that. The next book that I also DNF'd was Tastes Like Shakar by Nisha Sharma. So this is a companion to Nisha Sharma's previous book, Dating Dr. Dil, which was a super popular book on Book Talk. I actually read that book for the other romance vlog that I talked about earlier in this video, and that was like early in 2023. So I was excited when this book came out because I really enjoyed Dating Dr. Dil, but this book followed two side characters from the original book and explores their romance. But I think with this book, there was like two major things that just didn't do it for me. One was that I felt like the chemistry between the characters was a little stilted, and it wasn't as like romantic, I think, as I found Dating Dr. Dil to be. And there's also an element of, even in this book, there being an enemies to lovers situation, but it's really just sort of forced in my opinion. It's not really believable. And then the other element to this book that I really did not like was that around the midpoint of the book, and this is a teeny bit of a spoiler, but the sexual relationship between the characters goes into sort of a bondage situation, but it's just like sort of thrown in there. Like there's no lead up to it. There's no sexy build to that moment. It just like happens and is just thrown in there, and I was just like, why? Given the characters like personalities and also everything that happened so far in the book, it just didn't really fit in my opinion. Like it just didn't make sense, and so that just immediately turned me off the book. And I feel like when that type of turn off happens in a romance book, it just like ruins the entire book for me, and I don't want to continue reading it. So that's essentially what happened with this one. Like I just could not keep going because I was just so disinterested. It was really a shame though, because I really enjoyed Dating Dr. Dil, so hopefully there will be another Nisha Sharma book that comes out later on that I really enjoy, but this one just didn't do it for me. On a similar note, another romance that didn't do it for me was The Adult by Bronwyn Fisher. This is actually more of like a literary fiction, but involves a affair with an older woman, and the main character is also a woman, and so it's like a sapphic relationship, but it's also like this sort of toxic, you know, older woman with this very young woman who's in university, in undergrad, and obviously our main character thinks she's more of an adult than she is and is trying to act like more of an adult than she is. And honestly, this book, aside from me not really feeling the romance or the chemistry between the two characters, I also just really didn't like the writing style of this book. It felt just very overly pretentious, like the author was trying to make herself into this like super literary book when it was totally not necessary, and it just made for like an awkward reading experience and not a really fun one. Like it felt very slow as well, and I just wasn't interested by like the 30% in. Alright, now we're into some more spicier DNFs. So the next one that I have is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. This has been the romantasy book talk favorite viral book of 2023, I feel like, and I am of the minority, I honestly don't know, who really just didn't feel this book. I was initially enjoying it when I started the book, but as we progressed, it started to slowly get on my nerves, and it was starting to slowly fall into those annoying tropes that I've seen before that I don't really like. And while I liked our main character as a person from the initial 30% of the book, I wasn't really feeling the romance, like the hate to love situation, or the like love interest himself. And I just feel like I'm overall over the whole like bad boy trope these days, but like power to those of you who still really enjoyed that because it was a really fun trope when I was younger. But aside from that, I think the main reason that I didn't enjoy this book and the reason why I DNF'd it was just the thin and sort of flimsy world building, and also the lack of gravity when it came to the dragons. I feel like they should have been such an epic thing in this book, but they felt so minor or like not as impactful, I guess, as I've seen in other fantasy books. So this just didn't do it for me in the fantasy element either. It felt like a mashup of a rip-off Hunger Games and then like a even more poorly executed ACOTAR, and I just wasn't feeling it. Alright, the last two DNFs that I have are actually ones that I'm so sad that I DNF'd, and maybe I will come back to these later, but I just honestly couldn't get through these, and I also just wasn't in the headspace to get through the rest of them. So the first one is Bloodmarked by Tracy Deonn. This is the sequel to Legendborn, which those of you who have been watching my channel for a while, you know is one of my favorite books of like 2020, I think, when it came out. And so when I knew that this book was coming out, I was so excited, and I picked it up earlier in 2023, and I was also just going through some hard stuff at that time of the year. And so on the one hand, I wasn't in the headspace to like read this, but on the other hand, I do feel like this book just overly complicated some elements of the first book, and obviously it was just like expanding the world, and that was great, but I just felt like it got really slow and didn't have the spark of the first book. Like I felt like the first book was so original and so exciting, but this one lacked that excitement for me. I definitely feel like I need to give it another chance, so take this all with a grain of salt. But yeah, if you have read this, let me know what you thought of it and if you think I should give it a second chance. Alrighty, and then the last book that I have to talk about that I DNF'd in 2023 was Chain of Thorns by Cassandra Clare, the last book in the Last Hour series. So this is one of the Shadowhunter books. I've read like the first two, really enjoyed them, and I was really enjoying the beginning of this book when I first started it, but as I kept going, I started to see my interest wane, and I do feel like these days Cassandra Clare's books are just so long, and I feel like they really need to be condensed because there's just so much text and unnecessary stuff, and I feel like the actual plot of the book is like much less, and I just wanted a more like contained story. I do, however, want to know what happens with the characters, so I hope that I can finish this book at some point, but I feel like I'm falling into this like third book DNF trap. It happened to me with the Dark Artifices series. To this day, I have not finished Queen of Air and Darkness, so I really hope that that doesn't happen with this book, because personally I liked this series a little bit more than the Dark Artifices series, so we'll see. If you have read Chain of Thorns, let me know what you thought of it. I'd love to hear your thoughts without spoilers, obviously. I do want to know what happens in the end, so I probably will pick this up at some point, but I'm also just like not as much into YA these days, so it's also made it a little bit more difficult to read these books. With that said, those are all of the books that I want to talk about on this video of the worst books, the most disappointing books that I read in 2023. As I said at the beginning of this video, this is the year that I've DNF'd the most books, and I think that's just a matter of me not wanting to slog through books that I'm not enjoying, but it was also a matter of me like experimenting with some of my tastes. Like I did a lot more challenge videos where I was trying new books that I necessarily wouldn't have tried before, and so I think that added to the element of me DNFing more books or not liking more books, because usually I feel like I just stick to the books that like I know I'm gonna like. So this has definitely got me thinking about like what I want to be reading in 2024 and how I want to focus my time, because this was a bit tiring this year, just like reading books that I wasn't enjoying, especially the ones that I like forced myself through. So we'll see. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Definitely let me know your thoughts down below on all of these books that I mentioned today. If you think I should pick any of them back up again, or if you really disagreed with the ones that I didn't like, let me know down below. And if you haven't already, go check out my Instagram, Goodreads, TikTok, and Bindery down below, where you can get exclusive content from me and also help me publish books under my imprint, Boundless Press. Here's to another year of reading, and I will see you guys in my next video. So please remember that this story ain't over. Bye!